What was different about you this time
Yeah.
moving through the grieving process with your dad than when you moved through it with your mom?
And the similarities were coping, because you just have to cope.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when it's on you, you just have to cope. However, I was a lot more in tune with my needs. So if I needed to stop, I'd stop and I would ask for help. That was the stark difference. And I think the huge thing I was aware of was just giving myself the grace and space to feel my feelings.
Welcome to the Gen X Shift podcast, a show for Gen Xers who are navigating some pretty tough transitions and aren't sure how to move forward. I'm your host, Michele Walter, proud Gen Xer, former lawyer turned entrepreneur, huge Jason Momoa fan, and margarita snob. And I've navigated a lot of transitions in my life, from losing my mom suddenly to a heart attack to starting my own business. But I often did it all on my own because I was too stubborn to ask for help. Now I'm on a mission to give actionable strategies to other Gen Xers so that they can find the confidence, courage, and clarity they need to make a shift. So let's rock and roll. Well, hey, Gen Xers. Welcome back to what is bound to be a powerful conversation this week with my dear friend, Christina Lord. Christina actually lives over in England, and we've never met each other in person, yet we feel like we've known each other for years. We met through another coach that was from our coaching school and was leading a group program, and Christina and I were participants in that program. And that was about 4 years ago, and we've stayed in touch ever since then, developing a relationship across social media. And I wanted to have her on the podcast because for the month of May, I've been wanting to focus on what it's like as Gen Xers navigate losing our parents, whether that has been losing a parent from a very young age or losing our parent later in life, what it's like to lose one parent and then two parents. There's such a depth of experience in navigating the loss of our parents. And I feel like it's a conversation that we're starting to have more of, and we need to continue to have more of. Because look, as Gen Xers, we often try to tough it out, to do things on our own, to just figure it out on our own, or maybe not figure it out at all and just ignore what's happening for us. And I wanted to have this conversation with Christina because as people who have navigated the loss of a parent, we have a perspective that I think can be useful to a lot of Gen Xers. And that's a perspective of learning how to grieve, learning how to give space for that loss, learning how to recognize the signs of grief. So in this conversation with Christina, we get into the loss of her mom in 2010 while she was navigating a lot going on in her corporate career at the time. She also got divorced shortly after that. And then she eventually quit her stable corporate job and entered into a coaching program and started her own coaching business, only in the middle of that to then lose her father during COVID toward the fall of 2022. So Christina has navigated a lot of shifts in her life, a lot of shifts that were forced, involuntary. And so to listen to her story through those shifts, through what she didn't even know at the time was the grieving process of the death of her mom, and how she learned to give space to her grief so that when her dad passed, she navigated that grief differently, not better or easier, just differently. And toward the end of our conversation, she shares some wisdom that I hope you really take to heart in terms of what you can offer yourself if you're someone who is navigating watching a parent near the end of their life or navigating having lost a parent, no matter when that was. With these conversations around losing our parents, I want to invite us all to learn how to connect to our grief, to connect to each other, and connect back to ourselves. Christina is a beautiful coach. She's also a breathwork facilitator and a resilience expert. And because we really took our time to kind of go through her journey with losing her parents and her grief process, we're going to have a part 2 of this, because I really want us to have another conversation around some of the practices, teachings, and modalities that we both used to help us navigate our grief around losing a parent. So for this conversation, as always, please take care of yourself. Please hit pause if you need a little space around listening to this. Reach out to me if you have questions or an experience you'd like to share. And now let me send you off into this beautiful, empowering conversation with my dear friend, Christina Lord. So here we are. We did it. Tech issue. Speed damned.
We made it.
We're just rolling right into this. I'm so grateful to have you here. And I'm glad that we figured this shit out together. It's what we do, right?
It is what we do. And it's why we practice mindful meditation, so that we are responding rather than reacting.
I think we both handled that really well.
I think we did too. I think we should be very proud of ourselves.
Of tech shit show trying to get logged in where we couldn't either hear each other or it was, but we just decided to hop on Zoom and do it on Zoom instead of Riverside. And so we just went with the flow. And I thought we handled it really brilliantly. So kudos to us. I think so too. Mm-hmm. So thank you, my love, for having this conversation with me today. I'm going to kind of say how we know each other, but when we had the pre-call to talk about what we want to talk about for the podcast, you filled out my form and you had all of these amazing topics. And I get on the call and I'm like, yeah, those are great, but can we talk about our parents dying? That's what I'm talking about you with. So talk with you about. So I probably will have you back at some point to talk about all of the amazing other topics.
All of the other things.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about our parents passing away and wherever the conversation takes us. I know there's going to be some talk too about how your coaching practices and breathwork practices and resilience wisdom help support you through the death of your dad, and maybe talking about what it looked like for you navigating the death of your mom years prior to that, sort of seeing what the differences might be with these practices. And so we're just going to let it rip and see where the conversation takes us. And if we talk about other topics, that's awesome.
Perfect.
Before we get into it, I want to let folks know how we know each other, because every time I sit down to do one of these podcasts, I am so grateful and blown away by the awesome people that I know. And you are one of those people that we, I think, synchronistically met, is how I like to describe it, because we both went to the same coaching school, did not know each other during that coaching program, IPEC, the Institute for Professional Excellence in Coaching. And we met through a group program that was being taught by Stacey Hartman, who is also an IPEC coach and teacher. And she was doing a group program around business coaching and all things shadow work and some fabulous stuff. And that's how we met. And we kind of hit it off, and we've stayed in touch over the years. That's probably been what, like 4 years ago now?
It will be 4 years. Yeah. Scarily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we've never met because you live across the pond.
We have never physically met, but one day we will, because
will.
I intend, well, you're obviously more than welcome to come over once you have a trip over to Europe, but I fully intend to come back to the US. So either way.
Where in England do you live?
I live in the northeast of England, so I'm kind of nearer Scotland than I am London. So it's the closest city is Newcastle. So it's on the coast. It's east of Newcastle. I
always just stupidly assume everybody lives in London.
Don't worry, everybody does. You must know the Queen. Yeah, no, yeah, we get a lot of that. I mean, I was down so on the train, it takes about 3 hours to get to London. So I'm 3 hours kind of north of London on the train, just to give you an idea.
You posted something on Instagram the other day about going to London, and that's what made me realize, she doesn't live in London.
Yes, exactly. Yes. It's a little less busy. London, I'm sure for anyone who's visited, it's busy. Well, it's capital city, isn't it? So yes, it's a lot less busy where I'm from. So it's nice to visit, nice to come back home.
That's how I feel about New York City here. It's great to
Yes,
visit. Really glad when I
full
leave.
on. Totally. Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah. And you're always posting Instagram videos of taking a cold plunge in the bitterly cold
North
ocean.
Sea. Mm, the North Sea, yeah. It's kind of I'm trying to do the conversion into Fahrenheit. But it's
It's
definitely in
just
the kind of
cold.
late 40s Fahrenheit, early 50s maybe. But it's cold. Yes, it's invigorating. That's the word I like to use. Invigorating. Bracing.
I think cold water exposure therapy is amazing. And if I lived closer to an ocean, I would do that. So the best thing I have is my shower. And I don't
Yeah.
do that as often as I would like to. It's just so great for the body and mind. So I
Oh,
think you're
it's
badass for doing that.
It's um it's addictive is what it is. I really believe that there's healing properties. I mean in nature anyway, but actually exposing your body to something that is, I mean it never really gets easier going in. It's shocking every time. But and you squeal like a little girl. But it's all part of the fun. And yeah, I always feel amazing when I come out. I just feel renewed, refreshed, and invigorated. So yeah, a lot of people think I'm absolutely crazy for doing it, but I think they're crazy not to. So that's where we've just landed.
I think you're a badass. I don't think you're crazy. I think that's pretty badass.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think you're badass, Michelle, so I'll take that from you.
uh, yeah, me and my little 2 minute cold shower, totally badass.
Come on, you've done badass things. I know this.
So yeah, let's because I know we have a lot that we want to get into that I think is going to be healing for
Mm.
people because unfortunately we are at the age, and I don't even know that that's right to say because as we know, our parents can pass away at any age. I have friends whose
Mm.
parents passed away when they were really young in high school. I have people whose folks are still around. And I have a lot of friends recently whose parents have passed away just in the last year. And
Mhm.
so I feel like it's always a relevant topic. And
Yeah.
I personally feel like we are never old enough to lose one or both of our parents. We could
Mm.
be 70 and our
Mm.
parents could be 90, and it's still not enough time. We're still
Yeah,
not old. So
of course.
I I want to get into that. But before we do that, because you are a fellow Gen Xer, I'm a few years older than you. I always want to start off by just letting folks get to know the Gen X Christina in terms of what life was like growing up for you in England, because I tend to associate Gen X with just America. And I did
Mm.
an interview recently with someone who grew up in South Africa and it spent most of her childhood in South Africa. And it's
Mm.
really cool to make the connections though across the world in terms of the time periods, the culture, the society, just where the world was
Mm.
as we were growing up as Gen Xers between, 65 and 80, essentially, but those later Gen Xers who were born in 80, then growing up more in the 80s and early 90s.
Mm.
So I think those frames of reference can be helpful in terms of understanding who we are and how we've gotten to where we are as adults.
Mm.
So just take us back and rewind the tape a little bit in time to what life was like for young Christina growing up in the late 70s and 80s in England.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born September 79, so I just got in there before the 80s. I'm just a wisp into the 70s, which is good because I'm a big fan of disco music. So that's what always resonated with me that are still in the 70s. For me, so I have one older sister who's 3.5 years older than me. Still very, very close to her. In spirit, not geographically, because she lives in New Zealand, so about as far away as you can get. So yeah, growing up, it was quite idyllic. It's funny, isn't it, when you look back and you think how much a lot of the time we assume that our childhood is exactly the same as everybody else's childhood, and then you grow up and you realize that it's not. So both of my parents were teachers. My dad was a bakery lecturer, so basically teaching college students bakery skills. So a very hands-on guy. And my mother was a primary school teacher. So she very much taught kind of infant children, so from kind of reception age, so kindergarten, I guess, is more the terminology in the US. So she loved, teaching little kids, and my dad taught older kind of kids and adults, really. And so that meant that pretty much every holiday, we were away. So we had a caravan that hitched up to the car, and off we would go. And so you would see us, car, a boat on top of the car, bikes on the back, and then a caravan. We would just the whole thing. And we would more often than not holiday in the UK. We did take trips when we were older over to Europe, but generally speaking, we would stay in the UK. For anybody who's visited the UK, and obviously there is huge history here, I have probably visited every National Trust house in the UK over the years, which at the time I remember thinking was quite uncool, but actually now I know is very cool. So I'm eternally thankful for my parents that they just were very outdoors with us. We played a lot outside, so we used to go hiking, we used to build dams, we used to collect water. It was all of those fun things that we used to do. So time was quite idyllic, really, actually. Those are my, loveliest memories of kind of spending certainly the summers just away a lot. Easter holidays away. We would spend most times through the weathers all away. I have some very becoming pictures of me with a basin haircut, because obviously that was all the rage back then, dressed head to toe in bright orange cagoule wear. So that's kind of the look. I should have had a picture to show.
If you can find a picture, I'll plug it into the video. What is cagoule wear? What is that?
Sorry, so it's waterproofs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so waterproof jacket,
Mm-hmm.
waterproof, attire.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and school wise, always enjoyed school. Had good experiences mostly. Went to a kind of very small primary school, and then to a secondary school, as we call them over here. And yeah, life was pretty good. Like I said, I got on with my sister. I used to hang out with her friends a lot. And so as I grew older, my social scene, let's just say I cheekily went out, before it was legally, before it's the whole kind of, obviously in the UK we can go out before we're 21, right? So it's 18 is the age limit. But never really used to get ID'd, so I went out pretty early, to be honest, when I was kind of 15, 16. So a few years before, but I had my older sister to look after me. So but yeah, lots of dancing, just yeah, lots of playful. I mean, I do. I look back on my childhood, and now I know from growing up and speaking to so many people, my parents stayed together. Um, as I say, we had a stable upbringing. So I will be forever grateful for feeling safe and secure and loved.
Mm.
So yeah, it was good.
That's beautiful. And it sounds like you had a really close relationship with your folks, your
Mm,
parents. We say folks here in the States, or at least
yeah.
where I'm from, we say folks, with your parents, with your sister, and you created a lot of really beautiful childhood memories. So
Mm,
it does sound like an idyllic childhood
mm,
growing up over there. Yeah.
it was.
So fast forwarding just a little bit, I know that you were married and divorced. How old were you when you got married?
I was 29 when I got married.
Yeah.
So I met my then husband at university. So I was 19 when I met him, and we dated for 10 years, married at 29, and then divorced, well, separated 6 years after that. So 16 years in total together. But I was 35 by the time we separated. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what were you doing at the time, career-wise, when you separated from
Mm.
your husband?
Yeah, so I was climbing the corporate ladder In the branding industry, so FMCG, so fast moving consumer goods industry. So it was a branding company that basically dealt with packaging for brand owners, but retailers as well. So we used to have clients like Walmart. So we had US based retailers. Bacardi was another client of ours, as well as obviously some other European brands. But yes, very fast paced. So my background was always in the marketing, branding, client service space. So long hours, um, you know, they say jump, you ask how high. And yeah, I used to tell myself, oh yeah, I get off on pressure. I need pressure to function. And I look back on that and think, did you? Or was
Mm-hmm.
that a story you told yourself? So
Mm-hmm.
yes, the work, I've always been very work centered, driven, like to be busy. So yeah, back then that was my focus, which was climbing the corporate ladder of, getting up to account director level for the company I was working for, and yeah, a few professional burnouts
Mm-hmm.
in my wake, more than one, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. How long were you in that career?
Oh, so I graduated from uni um in 2021, 22. Um, and so it would have been probably a good 20 years or upwards of
Mm-hmm.
that in that industry. So advertising agency first, a few different agencies, and then yeah, on to some other agencies after that. So yeah, always agency side, so always, the person giving the service. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of tying together the timeline here. So you did that for about 20 years until you were what, early 40s, sounds like?
Well, yeah, so probably would have been, let's have a look. So, well, it was 35 when I decided to take the break that I took. When the universe administered the cosmic 2x4 to the head, which redirected my course. That happened, yeah, when I was around the age of 35.
So
Yeah.
that was because that's when you divorced or separated. So did all of this kind of collide at the same time? The career burnout and yeah. What was
Mm.
that experience like?
The cluster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, yes, it was the classic, um, was it a breakdown or a breakthrough? It was both.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think for a few years prior, and obviously this links in with our conversation around grief. So that was 2014 when that culminated, when that ending happened. But 4 years prior to that, I lost my mum to brain cancer. And it was a very short span of time from diagnosis to death. And when I look back over those 4 years from when that happened with my mum and then everything else that happened after that, it then became clear that it was a build-up, it was an aftermath of unhealed grief then, and just what it then replicated afterwards. So it kind of culminated in this kind of 4-year peak where I let's just say the universe sent me a signal I couldn't ignore. I'd been ignoring very successfully these signals that, I use the analogy, and I know I have with you, Michelle, before, where, the movie, the rom-coms where the guy's on the street and the girl's in the, upstairs room, and the guy's trying to get the attention by throwing the pebbles on the window to get the attention. And she's like, I feel like that happened maybe for a good 3 years. I'm like, what's that tapping noise? And then the tapping turned into bangs, and then the bangs turned into a broken window, and then the culmination of that, basically, the pebble turned into a boulder that landed square in my living room, where life or the universe, however you want to put it sent me something that I couldn't ignore because I had been successfully ignoring it for some
Mm-hmm.
time. So.
Yeah, I want to pause on that for a second because this is getting us on the on-ramp where we were wanting to take this conversation. And I think it's so important to highlight how you were doing what I think so many people of our generation and our parents before us, the boomer generation, were so great at doing, which is climb the corporate ladder, be quote successful according to external expectations of what that looks like, all at the expense of that tapping on the window that we didn't want to listen to or
Yeah.
didn't know how to listen to, maybe is the better way to say it. Like we hadn't learned how to listen to those internal whispers that had been talking to us for years, that we were
Mm.
just like swatted away like it was some annoying little gnat because you were
Yeah.
climbing the ladder, you were married, like from all outward expectations, you had it all. You had the marriage, you had the great job, you had the great family upbringing, blah,
Mm.
blah, blah. And something in you wasn't aligned, something
Yeah.
wasn't sitting right, something was pulling at you.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so building for years. And then when your mom passes away in 2010, very shockingly, even though you had like there was some notice of the illness, but still it
Mm.
happened very quickly.
It did.
All of that comes crashing down, the career, the marriage, all the things that up until that point you thought you had just kind of stuffed away.
Mhm.
So let's kind of turn now toward that time in 2010 when your mom got sick and when she passed
Mm.
away. What was that journey? What were you
Yeah.
experiencing during that time?
Yeah, that's exactly what you just said. I call it we're handed this blueprint of I'll be happy when. And it's get your education, meet somebody, get a job, climb the ladder, get a house, get a car, get a pet, and then you have children and da 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 da. And it's all these I'll be happy when checklist boxes. And I checked most of them, a lot of them. And I remember a series of things where I just thought, is this it? This can't be it. What is this? No. There was early signs. But the thing is, you look around at everybody else who is around you, and you're in that vacuum, I guess, a lot of the time, where you think, well, everybody else seems to be doing it, so I'll just carry on. And for me in 2010, that year, so this happened just before, about a month before my mum was diagnosed. Um, so my sister was all set to emigrate to New Zealand, so that was the same year. So that was happening. And I had just received a promotion. So my boss got promoted the same time I got promoted. So we both went, oh. The problem with that, I later was confronted with, was he was then out of the country a lot of the time. So the promotion he got meant that he was, sucked elsewhere. And the position I held, the client that we were working and doing the packaging for, was going through their biggest ever relaunch in history. And so I was heading up that team to deliver that. So unprecedented volume of work, brand new into my role, my manager, not directly there a lot of the time. So, was understandably a little bit nervous, happy to get the promotion, but I remember thinking, can I do this? So I was already in that space. And then before my mum was diagnosed, we actually had to push for the diagnosis. So basically, we kind of lost her before we lost her, in that her personality changed because it ended up being brain cancer. We thought it was depression because she just stopped eating, she stopped responding, she was aggravated, and she had suffered from depression years previous. So we just thought, well, it's that. But she went downhill very, very quickly. So much so that actually the doctors actually sectioned her at one point. So she was in a mental institution essentially, which was absolutely heart-wrenching to see her in that space. And this all happened around the time that my sister had emigrated. So when we pushed for having scans because we think at that point we were like, there's something else wrong here. This is not adding up. So eventually she had some MRI scans, and they found two really large tumors, one in the frontal lobe and one towards the back, and they were sizable. So upon this diagnosis, my sister had been in New Zealand about 2 weeks. So bless, she left her husband in New Zealand, flew back to the UK to live back with my dad. And then for the next 4 months, I would work long hours during the week, and at the weekends, I would drive the 2.5, 3 hours up to relieve my sister. And go and see my mum in hospital. So after the diagnosis, they then set about, right, well, let's try radiotherapy, let's try lots of different things. But what was really difficult was, like I say, we lost her before we lost her because she never really regained the woman she was. She went very childlike. The way that the tumor was pressing on parts of the brain, when they gave her steroids, it kind of eased the pressure, the swelling. So then she would come more compos mentis. But then obviously they couldn't keep her on that medication. So they would, dial it back down again. And she would hallucinate. She would be cranky. It was very difficult to see her in that state. And for us to not know at that point whether she was going to survive this, so we were all clinging on to the fact that, well, people do live with brain tumors, it's a thing. And I think we clung on to that, looking back, probably a little bit too much, to be honest. And it was up and down basically for 4 months. And it got to the point where my sister had to go back to New Zealand because, bless, her husband was over there. She had a job to start, life had to go on. So back she went, and the way that it all happened, and as we hear a lot of the time happening, people pass away when nobody's there. And that's how it was with my mum. So she was in hospital and basically had a huge seizure during the night. So none of us were in there in the hospital. And I was actually at a friend's wedding in London, which I was, umming and ahhing whether to go. But this particular day, I needed a break as well. So I was in London when I got the call. It was before the wedding had happened. So I had to drop everything, get an emergency ticket, and come back up to be with my dad. I had to phone my sister and tell her that mum had gone, which was really, really difficult. Yeah.
How did you handle not being there when she passed?
Yeah, it was really hard. Really hard. I think part of it was a blessing in a way that she wasn't always compos mentis. Because then she wasn't fully aware of what was happening. So that was a protection for her. I think, yeah, it was hard because we were so close as a family, and to think that she was alone at that point was very difficult. And it was funny actually at the time, my sister was on this, like, I think it was anger very much at the beginning for her, and because of the distance of her having to travel as well, it was more, it was a lot for her in equal ways. And I brought tissues. I knew that tears would happen, but it's a good
Yeah.
job because tears are good.
Yep, let
It's
it
an
happen.
important part. It's an important part of letting it out. And still, and as we'll go on and talk about, I am very comfortable with crying. And, I have a lot of coaching clients that will apologize for crying, and I never accept their apology because
No.
for me, it's never needed.
Yeah.
So
It's sacred. They're important.
absolutely.
They're
They
healing.
are. They're part of our
But
healing. They're part of
yeah,
our release. And so it's really
yeah,
important to let them out and not hold them in.
yeah.
To be fair, I don't think I've ever held them in really. I think I've always been an open channel for tears. But no, it was difficult in that, obviously you just want to be there at that point. And as I'll go on and talk about, I was there, I was present when my dad passed. Um, and so the only thing that you can hope is that it was quick and painless. But my sister had agreed like some weeks, well, it was maybe a week or two later when she arrived back in the UK, to actually meet with the doctor to find out what exactly had happened at the point where she'd gone. And it was funny, I do remember this quite clearly. I had strangely, after the shock of her passing, I'd reached quite a space of, I wouldn't say early acceptance, but a bit of peace, or it felt that way. But my sister was angry, and she said she'd arranged this meeting with the doctor. And I remember thinking at the time, I don't know whether I want to be there. But then for some reason I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll regret not going, so I'll go. And the terrible thing was the meeting was in the hospital, and it was back down through the ward where my mum was. So that was awful. That was traumatizing, going back in the hospital. And then we met with the doctor, this poor doctor, and my sister was grilling, wanted information. She wanted to know what had happened, rightly, for her. And I remember just coming out of there and just feeling like the little bit of peace that I had, the little bit of acceptance that I'd found had gone, because it was all very clinically described as to what happened. And so that was really, really difficult. And I remember, obviously, just after it happened, I obviously didn't go back to work. And there was a period of time, might have been a week or two, and then I went back to work. It might have even been a little bit longer because obviously my sister had to come back from New Zealand. And I just remember going back to work and feeling like my brain had been replaced with cotton wool. I could not make a decision.
Couldn't focus, couldn't
No.
make a decision, couldn't, yeah.
And I thought there was something wrong with me.
A week or two after your mom had passed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, how old was your mom when she passed?
She was 65.
Yeah, that's so young. I mean, that especially by today's standards, so young. And I just want to highlight again the fact that this was all going on at the same time that your marriage was falling apart or had already fallen apart, and you separated.
No, so it hadn't. No, so 2014 was when my marriage fell apart.
Okay.
I suppose it was maybe on shaky ground. Well, no, it wasn't, because we married in 2009. So this was the year after.
Yeah.
But what I will add as well is that 2 years after this point, so 2012, 2013, we lost my partner's mother to cancer. So that was, also very difficult to navigate, which would have had a bearing on everything as well.
Yeah. So there's a lot of grief is what I wanted to kind of highlight here in a very short amount of time between 2010 and 2014 and thereafter.
Yeah.
And when there's a couple of things you said that I want to come back to, the first one is just that cotton wool in the brain feeling, especially so soon after your mom passing. I mean, by all measures, there are some people who feel like getting back to work is what allows them to heal. And I want to get curious when I hear people say that in terms of what are they avoiding or resisting about the healing process if they feel like work needs to be a distraction from their grieving and their healing.
Yeah.
And so there's that. And the other thing I wanted to come back to was just in not being there when your mom passed. Did you or did anybody in your family struggle with feeling like you had something you needed to forgive yourselves for not being there? Or was that not sort of something you experienced?
I suppose to a certain degree we did, but the type of family we are, when everyone was fitting well, we were the type of family that if somebody was popping out to go to the shops, they would get a hug. And we were constantly telling each other that we loved each other. So that was we were emotionally very giving and open as a family. And so it wasn't that things got kind of left unsaid, really, particularly. I think it was just what we wanted to be there to comfort her, and that we couldn't stand the thought of her suffering, and we weren't there to kind of hold her hand.
Yeah. I was curious about that because I know folks who lost their parent who forgiveness is a real barrier for them in terms of forgiving
Yeah.
themselves for not being there at the time, not being there enough leading up to
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And my experience is very similar to yours in that, first of all, my mom and I were very close, very effusive with our emotions, always hugged each other. Yeah, if we were just like going to the store, saying, I love you all the time.
Yeah.
I don't, as between my mother and me, I'm not going to speak for my brother and her, but for my mother and me, I didn't feel like there was anything unsaid. Of course, there's always wishes that there was more to say,
Of course.
and
Yeah.
regret over that we're never going to get to say more.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like we had anything that was unresolved. And while I hate the fact that she died in her office by herself after midnight working is awful. I still can't. That's not something I really like to think about,
No.
what that was like for her having a heart attack by herself. I can't imagine. And so all of that's to say, like, I'm sort of similar to you. I didn't feel like there was anything I needed to forgive myself for not being there. There was a
Mm.
small part of me that thinks that had I lived closer to my mom, or maybe if I'd stayed in Nebraska, or if I'd lived in Colorado and could go home to see her more, maybe she would have gotten healthier. Maybe she would have lived longer. Who knows? But that's all. We know that that's not a helpful or supportive outlet to
No.
have. So I appreciate you being so vulnerable and sharing that story and what that was like for you in that experience with everything that you had going on, all of the
Mm.
pressure that you had at work,
Mm.
on top of your mom being sick, having to go travel 2.5 hours when you could to take care of her and balance that with your sister, and your sister experiencing her own grief and challenges and being so far away from her husband in New Zealand, and your dad in the middle of all of this too, like having to
Yeah.
take care of your dad and your dad's experience of losing his partner. It was a lot to take on. And at the same time, you were not in the same kind of place that you're in now in
Oh no.
terms of emotional work and healing that you have done. So you went back to work fairly quickly after your mom passed. How, like, tie the ends together with for me in terms of how that impacted you, your eventual burnout, and how you started coming into the work that you're doing now
Yeah.
in your coaching and your breath work and your resiliency work. Like, let's take that
Yeah,
journey.
absolutely. No, and I really want to focus on this bit because I don't want anybody to go through the hell that I went through. When I look back at 2010, I remember waking up with like an anvil weight on my chest, and I used to force myself to get up every morning, and just I would will myself just to keep going. And I would just tell myself I was total coping mechanism. Just, you know, just getting
That's what good
smacked.
Gen Xers do. Just like
Oh,
suck it up and
honestly,
pull yourself up by your
it was, it
bootstraps.
was, it
And
was, yeah, it was like gladiators ready. It was just like, and stress, huge stress at work, being shouted at by the client, being spoken to like not very well at all, but holding it together, because that's what you do, and especially, I mean, British people are known for stiff upper lip. Can't show weakness. No, no, no. And so just holding it all in and all together. And that, I mean, the culmination of that. And I remember, so there was a period of time that I did have off, and then I went back to work. And I remember the first day back when my brain felt like it was made out of cotton wool. Somebody, I mean, obviously, I worked in an open office, so there was many people in the office that were buzzing around us, busy office. And someone who'd been on holiday who obviously hadn't heard what had happened, the pretty much first person that I saw that day ran over to me and said, How are you? How's your mum? Well, you can imagine what happened. I crumpled. I crumpled. I was a mess. I had to get taken off because, yeah, I was fragile. I was a shell. looking back, I was a shell of my former self. And I didn't actually last that long at work. I had a couple of months off after that because I think I'd maybe been back at work maybe 2 weeks, maybe a week, 2 weeks. And I remember saying to my boss, which took me a lot, I sat him down and I said, I need you to take some work off me because I can't function right now. I'm barely able to multitask and hold a decision or make a decision in my mind. And, nice guy, but clueless when it came to grieving because his response was, okay, you will let me know when you're feeling better so I can give it back to you.
Because there's a time limit, right? Got to be
And
done.
and I just remember thinking, oh, well, so it's me. I'm the problem. I can't cope. I'm weak. Not, I'm grieving and you need to be supporting me. I mean, it took a lot for me to ask for help. It still takes me a lot to ask for help. But looking back, and this is why I'm so passionate, and I said to you about getting this message out there, because do not underestimate for anybody out there who has experienced grief, but for anybody who hasn't, and you're managing a team, know that they're fragile. Everybody's grieving process is different and everybody's is unique to them, but it does break you. It breaks you. And I put so much pressure on myself, thinking there was something wrong with me that I couldn't cope. And I wish I could go back to that shell back then and just give her a big hug and say, you know what, you're doing your best. But I
Mm-hmm.
will say, there was one particular moment, and I remember feeling like I was losing the plot. Like I remember thinking, have I lost my mind? And I remember, I think it was my brother-in-law at the time, he's quite stoic. He said to me, well, do you know, Christina, the fact is, you're probably not losing your mind because if you had, you wouldn't know it. You just wouldn't know. And I just kind of went, well, that's a good point.
That's
That is a
so
very
true.
good point.
That's
Because
so
that's
true.
reassuring that like you've
Yep.
got the awareness that you're losing your mind. It means that you haven't.
Yeah.
But I reached out this particular morning. I had hit a wall to the point where my body and my mind was just like, enough. I think I'd pushed past my limit. And I was broken. I was in bits. I couldn't function. I think I'd stopped eating. I wasn't sleeping. Everything was just falling apart. And I phoned my GP, my doctor, and this was actually quite synchronistic. The doctor that I called a few years previous, she had lost her mum to cancer. Her mum's name was Christina, and she was so kind to me. She said, "You come down here." She went, "I've booked you a double appointment. I've got a box of tissues waiting, and if all you do is cry for the whole 2 sessions, that's absolutely fine. You come down here, I'm here." And she was brilliant. So she wrote me a sick note. She gave me kind of other contacts and that kind of thing, and I took time off, but that it took me, I would say, a good month to wind down from the amount of pressure. I was like a tightly coiled spring. I couldn't relax. I felt guilty for not being at work
Yep.
for a month.
Yep.
And when I called my boss, the one that I said, can you, take some pressure off? When I called him and said, I've been signed off sick, and he said, is it stress? I said, well, no, it's bereavement. I've lost my mum to brain cancer. It's bereavement. But again, it's just this, and this is why I'm saying people aren't equipped to know that actually grief, as we'll talk about more probably, is the myriad of emotion that you feel in grieving is like no other experience you'll ever have. In
Yeah.
my in
Yeah.
both of my big bouts of grief and ones in between. But essentially, I also remember going to a therapist later because I just didn't feel like I could function. And I remember her saying to me, I shared this whole story about my sister emigrating, about my promotion and, you know, my mum's diagnosis and everything that had happened. And she just said, so let me get this straight. It sounds like you've been spinning lots of plates for a few months. And you've been running up and down, spinning those plates and making sure that none of them crash and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and running, 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 running. And then when you've got to a point where you're exhausted and you turn around and all of your plates are smashed on the ground. And I just remember like my shoulders dropping and just going, that is exactly how I feel. That is exactly how I feel. Everything that I have been trying not to have go wrong, everything's gone wrong. Everything that I was trying to keep afloat has smashed. So it took me months and months to recover from that.
I want to bring to the surface, just to put a finer point on some really important things that you've said there, for anyone who is listening, who is now in any kind of grief cycle, even if it's not over the loss of a parent, it could be over an illness, loss of a spouse, job change, whatever it might be. My brain is like firing in so many directions. So try and consolidate some thoughts here. One of the things that you said there that I want to highlight for folks is that you kind of hit on some symptoms, some little taps at the window, as you say, that were trying to get your attention during that, couple of weeks or month or so that you lasted at work before you decided to take that time off. It was feeling like you had that cotton in the brain, not wanting to get out of bed in the morning, feeling like there was a huge anvil on your chest, not being able to focus, not have motivation. These are things that I hope folks who are listening, if you are experiencing some of those, I want you to get curious about that. I think that's one of the invitations with this conversation, that hopefully we can normalize for you, that if you've been experiencing some grief that maybe you don't even know is grief, if you're experiencing some of those things, it could be time to stop and pause to see, am I grieving something that I haven't given sufficient space to grieve? That's the first thing. The second thing, coming back to your point about your boss, and let's also say that back in 2010, which was only 12 years ago, grief wasn't, at least to my knowledge, being talked about a lot. Grief has really only been really emphasized in the last several years, I think, anyway. At least that's my experience.
Feels like it. It feels like it.
At least people are listening. Maybe that's the way to put it now. There are more people talking about it, more, I don't know, but it's more in my field of vision for sure. And so grief isn't something that I feel like, especially our generation, had permission to feel and experience, let alone to fully keep processing. The second thing is that a lot of people of our generation and of older generations, and also of different cultures, societal upbringings, economic classes, whatever it might be, have different perspectives on grief. And there are a lot of expectations over how long is your grief process?
Yes.
I remember when I came back after my mom died, and somebody I was very close to, because I was gone for about 6 weeks taking care of all my mom's stuff. And I came back to DC, and shortly after that, within like a week or two, this person, I don't know, he wanted to go do something or whatever it was. And I was like, I'm not feeling it, like, or I was crying or whatever it was. And he was like, what's wrong? And I said, well, my mom, like, I'm thinking about my mom. And he's like, it's been 6 weeks. I thought you'd be better by now. So people have expectations of what grief is supposed to look like, both our friends and family and people in the workplace. So if you are somebody in a managerial role, or even a colleague of somebody who is experiencing grief of any kind, set your own shit aside, first of all. Yes, the office has to run. There can be some conversations that you can have with the person around what that might look like, but center instead the person who is grieving and ask them, what can I do to support you? What can the office do to support you during this time? Not, well, when do you think you might be done so you can get back to work? So those are just a couple of things I want to highlight in what you said.
Great highlights.
So many others. But you also said, you wish you could go back and hug that younger version of you. What now, with all the work that you have done, and we're going to get to that too here in a second, what would you like to say now, knowing what you know about grief, to that younger Christina about her grief at the time?
Yeah, no, great question. I would sit her down and I would just hold her and say, what you're going through is really hard, and you're not meant to battle it. You need to stop. The world and work and packaging that people put in the bin at the end of the day, in the trash, in the grand scheme of things, other people will cope without you there. Stop being a shero. Stop thinking that, you're indispensable, because you're not. And do the thing where you prioritize your parents' life, end of life. And do not shortchange that. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. So I would kind of firmly, lovingly, but firmly impress that upon her, because nobody did. Nobody did. Because we don't talk about this stuff. I remember reaching out to somebody, another girl that I knew who'd lost their mother to breast cancer. And I spoke to her and she said, oh yeah, no, I felt like I was going insane. I felt like my brain was made out of cotton wool. I was out socially with friends and felt alone, even though I was surrounded by people. I felt pressure to be okay when I wasn't okay. And just to have that validated by somebody else who's actually gone through it was like a tonic to me, because so many people, and this is the other thing that we'll add that I know you probably find as well, when people don't know what to say, the worst thing you can do is to ignore or avoid the grieving person. Don't do that. Do not do that. Even if you go over and say, I'm really sorry for your loss, or is there anything I can do? Or just be there. But to cross over the road or to avoid the person, you already feel like an alien. So to be alienated by people when actually the very thing you want is more love, not less love. And I think people are terrified of saying the wrong thing. I would say like the wrong thing, but just be there, physically be there. And even if you say nothing and just hold the person's hand and look in their eyes and say, this must be really hard, that is so much better than not saying anything at all, or ignoring people. Like, I can't impress that enough. There were so many people that didn't know what to say to me, so they avoided me, which just hurt like hell. And I was already hurting like hell. So
Those are beautiful words of wisdom, because we do not, as I was going to say as a country, but America, England, twins, Western society does not handle grief. I won't even say well at all. We don't handle grief at
we
all.
don't, because we're ill-equipped. No one wants to talk about it.
No, nobody wants to talk about it because it's too heavy. It's too dark.
Depressing.
I'm just going to wallow. It's depressing, blah, 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 blah. It's bullshit is what it is. And so to know that your inability to show up for someone who is grieving is about you and your discomfort with grief, which is understandable, again. And I don't want to like tell people you got to be good at being with somebody in grief.
I was a bit crap before
yeah,
I knew grief, to be fair.
Totally.
So
totally. Like that's an invitation for you to get curious about, well, why can't I be there for my friend who's grieving? What's my view of grief? What are my belief systems? What's my experience with grief?
Yeah.
And I love what you said about just being there, because of course, when somebody's grieving, we want to fix it. We want to tell them it'll get better. They're in a better place. That's probably one of my biggest pet peeves.
Yeah.
They're in a better place. I have my own beliefs about that. We each do. And so keep your beliefs to yourself and recognize those aren't necessarily going to be helpful for other people. But the best thing that you said there is just to be with the person. Yeah. Put your arm around them. Maybe even acknowledge, I don't know what to say here.
Yeah. Even that is
totally
great
fine.
To say. I don't know what to say. All right. There's nothing you can say, actually, but just be here. Just be.
Yeah. Don't try to fix it for me. Don't try to make me feel better. Allow my grief in me to take up space. I don't care how uncomfortable you are with that. Yeah.
And that's the truth. I mean, I think as well, I once heard somebody describe grief as when it just happens, it's here. And all you can see is your grief, and all you can feel is your grief. And then over time, it kind of shifts slowly but surely, so you can see other things, and then it shifts here. And then over time, it kind of sits here. And every so often, it'll come front and center, but then it'll shift back there. And it's almost you grow around your grief. So it never goes, you just grow around it. And so you learn how to integrate it. And I would say that not everybody does, because I know that some people, because of what we've said, they may have learned that actually I'm just going to push it down, lock it away in a box, and just pretend it never happened. I don't ever think that that's a good idea, personally. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. There's an equation I tell people all the time that Buddhist monk Shinzen Young came up with, so to speak, and it's suffering equals pain times resistance. And that
Nice.
we're going to have pain no matter what. We have no control over that. There's going to be pain. We can talk a little bit about it, our frame of reference for what pain is, but let's just say there's going to be pain. The suffering comes in when we're resisting that pain, and resisting
Totally.
can look like ignoring it, repressing it, stuffing it down, bulldozing our way through it, going back
Totally.
to work 2 weeks after somebody very important in our life dies. So
Yeah.
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 I two questions I want to ask you, and then I want to talk about your dad too, and then sort of come to what you have found
Yeah.
has helped you move through your dad's death differently than your mom's death.
Yeah.
The two questions I wanted to ask is, first of all, what do you feel like was taken away from you when your mom died?
Mm, great question. What was taken away from me? What comes up is almost a piece of my soul. There was some connection that just was lost. Some of my childhood, some memories that were lost, some innocence. I remember getting to that point as the grief journey, it's not linear as well. That's important to say, which I know I'll talk more about. I do remember this. So, I mean, we gave an example of lots of people don't know what to say, but I do also remember there was a lady, Jane, and I cannot remember her surname, unfortunately, but Jane was amazing. Jane came in and she gave me two books, and she said, "Look, one's quite religious, one's not, but both are brilliant. There you go." And one of them was called The Courage to Grieve by Judith Tattlebaum. I remember that because it's such
That's a very
bizarre.
proper sounding name.
I know. Judith Tattlebaum. It's a very small read, but in fact, it's funny. I've over the years bought several copies of that book, and I've gifted it to people that have lost somebody because it helped me so much. It just helped me feel like I was going less insane because it marks the stages of grief, and you kind of go, "Oh, right, I'm at this stage. Oh, I seem to be have hopped back to this stage. Interesting." But at least you've got categoric evidence of resonance of kind of, okay, like it's normal. Because nothing feels normal when you're grieving. You feel like you've had a lobotomy, like you feel like everything's just been taken out. Um, I will, well, two things I want to quickly mention before it goes out of my mind. One, you mentioned about pain. And my acronym that I use for myself and coaching clients and everybody, but especially with grief, when you're talking about what would I say to my younger self, mind body connection. Your body sends you more signals than you know. It sends more signals than your brain does to your body. Your heart alone sends more signals to your brain than vice versa. But my acronym for pain is pay attention inside now. It's a
Love
signal.
it.
It's a signal. It's trying to get your attention. It's not just happening to piss you off. It's trying to say you're in distress and you have needs that need to be met. And so you either need to slow down, you need a hug, you need to have a good meal, you need to sleep, you need to do something. So I didn't realize just how disconnected I was from my body, but I was because I ignored all the signals. And so strengthening that mind-body connection is a must. And so that's why I love the PAIN acronym, Pay Attention Inside Now, because it's not that it's just that awareness that something is being signaled to me. And ignore that signal at your peril, because it will come and find you. You can try and outrun it. Good luck with that.
It does. It does. It's like the dude in Scream. Like it just
Yeah.
keeps coming back.
It just
It's not
yeah,
gonna go.
yeah.
Any horror movie, they're gonna
Yeah.
keep coming back. They
They
don't
just
die.
they don't die. No, no, no.
They
It will keep
coming back.
going. It will keep getting louder until it
Mhm.
until it will take you down. So the PAIN acronym is one.
And what's the
Um,
halt? The halt is the other one, which
oh
kind of
yes,
dovetails off of pain. So you
it
pay attention
does. Well
inside now,
remembered.
and
Yes.
then you can ask
So
halt. Yeah, what's that?
yes. Am I hungry? Angry? What's the other
Lonely.
one? Lonely. Thank you. Tired. I
Yeah.
suddenly went, is it an I? No, it's an L. Yes, so that's from 12-step
Yeah.
program. So that's
Yeah.
for Alcoholics Anonymous. But yeah, that's the two that I tag team. Well remembered. So
Yeah.
pain, and then check in. When was the last time I had a good meal? Did I sleep well? Do I need to sleep some more? Because actually, the other thing that I wanted to mention, thank you, because it's jolted my brain into thinking, yes, that was the other thing. So I'm a total geek when it comes to reading about neuroscience and listening to all
Me
things
too.
about neuroscience. I love to know what the
Me
brain's
too.
doing and how all of the science works. And what I'll go on to talk about, but it's relevant for both times that I've grieved. When you are in a highly emotive state, your amygdala, which is the most primitive part of your brain, which is the top of your brain stem. I always imagine it as like a little kidney bean that's like this really loud, like very small dogs have really loud barks. I imagine it as being that, and it starts to bark really, really, really loudly. And it's like a siren going off. And I actually learned because I picked up a book called The Grieving Brain that was written by a neuroscientist. Um, and she talks about that our neurological pathways are designed where our amygdala is going off. It severs the connection from there to our executive function, which is
Hmm.
our decision making. So all those years ago, when I had cotton wool brain, that's because that had, rightly so, because we're designed to go into
Yep.
survival mode. Survival
Exactly.
meaning we don't need to think about, you know, critical paths and
Mhm.
who's going to do what when. We haven't got the function because we're trying to survive.
And
It's
like
evolution.
absolutely. And just to drive that point home, a lot of people in especially Western cultures are in a baseline survival mode
Yes.
because we are kind of hijacked by all of the negative things that we see, by negative things that have happened to us, by our unmetabolized trauma, by our unhealed grief. Our poor little amygdala is working overtime to help us literally survive. And coming back to your point about how, and the resistance point about ignoring it, stuffing it down, that is not turning off that survival mode. If anything, it's exacerbating it. So if you think,
It's
well,
strangling it.
I've just moved through it. I've just pulled myself up by my bootstraps and I'm good. No, you're not. You are in, this shit gets me riled up so bad. You are
Me
in
too.
elevated survival mode that
Yeah.
that turns into this like low grade fever that you don't even know you have. And what does
Yes.
that do? You are constantly running at elevated levels of cortisol and adrenaline, which make you tired, make you stressed, make you gain weight, make you not able to focus. I mean, it just makes so much sense. And yet why are we so resistant to letting ourselves heal? Like, let your poor little brain come out of survival mode so that you can
Yeah.
freaking function.
We do.
And
We
by
do. We
the
just
way,
push ourselves.
I totally hear you on neuroscience. Like, if you are a single, available, attractive neuroscience dude, I would love to date you because, yeah, all over the neuroscience. What Christine and I will share you.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Well,
what were you
if
going to
there's
say?
no. I'm glad you said that. I mean, yes, I concur. I concur. I mean,
Is there
I
an
know we're,
app for like attractive neuroscientists, like a dating app
I mean,
for
I know
them?
we're fans of Andrew Huberman. But
Yeah, I
although
know.
I know there's been rumors about Andrew more recently, but yeah, I mean, yeah, talk dirty to me, talk
Yes,
neuroscience to me.
absolutely.
That
Neuroscience,
that
dirty
gets me
talk. Yes.
totally like, oh, talk to me about the brain.
We're
No, but
so
it's
lame.
true. Well, no, but pick your lane. But yeah, no, if I was to go back to university, I would totally study neuroscience.
Yep.
But no, it's exactly what you say. I think it's because we don't talk about this because it's like, oh, well, that's depressing. That's hard. We don't understand it, and we don't really want to go there until we have to go there. The problem is to your point, people are swimming around in stress hormone to the degree that it just becomes familiar. So then familiar becomes normal. And you're
Yep.
like, oh no, this is just how everybody is. And it's not until actually you have a break out of it totally that you then come off of the cortisol drug and you suddenly go, ah, oh, oh. Oh, so this is what it's like to function without being wired all of the time. We're not built for it.
Mm-mm. No, literally not built. Survival mode is meant to be short periods of time. Like
Yeah,
when I teach mindfulness, I tell people like back in cave people days,
yeah,
survival mode was literally saber-toothed tiger, fight,
yeah,
flight, freeze, nowadays
yeah,
fawn, go
yes,
back to the cave,
yeah,
return to homeostasis. That's it.
yes, yeah,
But we are in constant survival mode
yeah.
now. Our bodies were not meant to function like that.
Nope.
So yeah. Okay. Take a breath because that stuff gets me
Got
riled
fired
up. I'm
up
like,
there.
oh. So let's fast forward. Oh no, I forgot. There was a second question I wanted to ask you because when I asked you what did you feel like was taken away from you when your mom
Oh,
passed, the second question that I wanted to ask you, and I don't ask this from a toxic positivity, which I don't believe in that crap standpoint. I
I
don't
know.
believe in, well, let's find like the silver lining in all of this. I want to know now, looking back in hindsight, what do you think your mom passing away gave you?
Mm, yeah, no, yeah, it's not a toxic positivity question at all. I think this is the irony. I call grief now, it's both beautiful and brutal, or
Mm,
beautifully brutal, or brutally beautiful. Pick
that gave
your
me goosebumps.
whichever
Yeah.
way you want to go, because it what grief does, it's polarizing, and it reminds you that things can change that are outside of your control. And it also brings everything into sharp focus of what matters and what does not matter.
Mm,
And so I think what it taught me was life is so fragile, so much more fragile than we think it is. And I remember thinking, oh no, this happens to other people. This doesn't happen to me. This is what I read about or watch or see. This doesn't happen to me. It can happen to any of us. And I think ultimately what it did, it broke me open. And I think that actually
mm,
was the beginning of my self-discovery, my inner work, my spiritual journey, and to go on and redirect me to the coaching to what I do now. And so it gave me clarity around how precious life is. Now, obviously, it didn't, you know, we've sometimes got to be delivered multiple lessons before we
mm.
fully learn them.
You mean it wasn't a one and done thing and got it? I'm
Unfortunately, no.
good.
I'm trying to think where there's ever been a one and done lesson, and I can't think of one.
Yep. That's
So,
that's the that's what growing is about. If you're not growing, you're
yeah,
dying. I mean, plain
so
and simple.
it's true.
So
True.
we don't
Yeah.
get these lessons just once. I
No.
had a fabulous mentor that I was part of her NUSHU group, Vanessa Cornell. I remember described it this way, and others have probably described it this way too. But it's like it's a spiral. And
Yeah.
so the thing is always there. We're
Yeah.
just coming at it from a
True.
different ring of the spiral at different
Yeah.
points in our life. So
Nice analogy. Yeah.
that's a good segue probably into a
Hmm.
couple of things. And I want to kind of do it in reverse chronological order actually and fast forward a little bit. to your dad's passing, because then I want to come back to the coaching and the
Yeah,
spiritual practices that you've learned since your
yeah,
mom passed away and that helped you through your dad's passing.
yeah.
So tell us, when did your dad pass away?
So my dad passed in September 2022.
Yeah, so less than 2 years ago, a year and a half ago.
Yeah, yeah, year and a
Yeah.
half ago.
And how old
He
was
was
he?
83, so he's a bit older.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so that happened. So I'll give a little bit of context as well. So let's have a look. 2017, 2018, I was working in America, in Arkansas.
I don't
Um,
think I knew that.
oh yeah,
Wait, I think I did, because my response when I first heard that is the same response I
Arkansas.
had just now. Why Arkansas from England? No offense
Yeah,
to
so
Arkansas. I love
that's
Arkansas. It's
the
beautiful.
yeah, I was gonna say that's the Walmart link because that's where Walmart head office is. So that's where I was based, Bentonville, Northwest Arkansas.
Ah,
And
okay.
I
Okay.
loved my time in the US.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely loved it. And that's where I actually started my coaching journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yes, I traveled to Dallas, Texas. I was the only British person. So yes. But anyway, so I fully had planned then I was going to move to Cincinnati. I was road tripping every weekend. I think the year and a half I was in the US, I made it around about 19 states. I just loved a road trip. There's nothing more that I love than a
Mm-hmm.
road trip. And yeah, was having a ball, was having a blast. And yeah, absolutely loved it. And then the universe basically stepped in again and went, yeah, it's really cute that you think that you're doing that, but actually there's other plans for you. So the umbilical cord, the invisible umbilical cord, snapped
Mm.
me back to the UK because my dad basically got diagnosed with prostate cancer at the same time that my work visa kind of ended.
Mm.
So back to the UK I came, 2018, and my dad, who quite old school. You know, he was born 1939. I'd grown a lot more emotionally close to him because of what we went through with my mum. You know, that definitely strengthened that relationship for sure. And when I arrived and we went through some of his doctor's appointments, etc., obviously, having lost his partner, his wife, to cancer, albeit a different kind of cancer, when he got the diagnosis of prostate cancer, which thank goodness is more treatable, he turned around to me and said, Christina, do you think you could maybe put your life on hold? Because I can't do this on my own. And what do you say when your parent says that to you? And I know as well, because my dad was very stoic, it took a lot for him to say that.
I was just going to say, can we celebrate your dad
Yes,
for asking for
exactly.
that? Yeah.
I do want to celebrate my dad for asking that because I
Mhm.
know that it was hard for him to do. And I think the dad previous my mum passing away probably wouldn't have done that. He would have just sucked it up and just gone on with it. But, you know, aging, etc. And he'd already at this point been living alone, you know, for a 7 year stretch and managing and doing all the things. So obviously that was just before COVID. So I was like, absolutely, Dad, we're going to get you through the treatment. So he started radiotherapy, took him there, you know, I felt very blessed actually that I was able to be there for him. Sidebar, I'd started my coach training, which I mentioned. They say don't coach your parents. I ignored that. I coached my dad because he worried a lot. And so I worked on his mindset. So he would then focus less on the worry and more on the potential. So,
That's so
um,
cool.
yeah, so oh yeah, he got coached within an inch of his life, ironically, to the point where we had a Freaky Friday role reversal where I would get like the teenage eye rolls.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean it was funny,
that's
but
payback.
it's yeah, payback's a bitch, right? But anyway, we got him through the treatment, and it was harrowing. It was hard, and it took it out of him. It definitely did. But forward a few months, we got him through that. We both actually flew to Canada, where my aunt lives near Montreal, and celebrated the fact that we'd beaten the cancer. So that was great. Post that, he was getting older. And when obviously you get older, his memory was starting to not be great. And I'd already started to talk to him about moving out of the family home. So I'd already planted the seed that, look, he'd already exhibited mental health issues of loneliness. And so I'd already started the conversation about, look, maybe it would be best if we actually found you somewhere where there's a community and you can actually have some support. And so we started those wheels in motion. And then COVID hit. So I think we got him moved in somewhere. And then obviously COVID hit and everybody was scared out of their tiny minds, especially within care homes kind of situations. So then he moved back in with me. And that happened lasted a few months. Now, I will also add, for anybody who's listening, Gen Xers, who are looking after elderly parents, the oscillation between resentment and guilt is real.
Mm-hmm.
It's real, and you are not a terrible person
Mm-hmm.
for wanting to strangle your parent.
Nope.
I did
Nope.
on a regular basis. A regular
Yep.
basis. Because the wheel of life, I saw before my very eyes my parent become my child. And no one warns you that you become your parent's parent. Nobody tells you
Mm-hmm.
that's going to happen. And so, actually, ironically, I again lost my parent before I lost them because he wasn't the dad that I knew, because his confidence was, depleting in front of my very eyes, and there was a lot more reassurance that was required throughout. So then it was a bit of a downward spiral. So he would have falls, I would get calls. There'd been a few times I had to call an ambulance. And then fast forward March 2022, he had a fall. I arrived, he was delirious. It was like a wounded animal on the floor. It was heart-wrenching. It was awful. I was in floods of tears. The ambulance, the paramedics were amazing. Scooped him up, got him to the hospital. And yeah, he was delirious. So he was in and out. He was hallucinating. It was all shades of strange and weird. Worried, spent, all that day in hospital until he was admitted. And then 10 days into his stay, he had a stroke.
Mm.
And so the remaining 8 months were up, down, every day. Just absolute. I mean, I don't really have words. It was just, 2010 will go down in history as one of the worst years in my life, but this is probably unparalleled. It was awful
Mm. Mm.
to
I,
see, yeah,
I can't
to
imagine.
watch him deteriorate in front of my eyes. It was awful.
Mm. I cannot imagine. In both situations with your parents, your mom was quicker, but there was this process that
Yeah.
you went through, as you said, of losing them both before you really lost them.
Mm.
And there's no good way to lose a parent. I
No,
lost my mom suddenly with no warning. I don't think that's better or worse than losing a
no, it's just
parent with a
different.
long on ramp. Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
different.
it's
Exactly.
different because it's a shock, but then the long ramp is that to see them suffer is awful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a part of you that feels terrible because you're suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I had to roll my business back. I didn't have any capacity to hold space for anybody else. I was barely holding it together for myself. I'm single,
Yep.
so I was going back to an empty house every night. It was the pits. It was the
Yeah,
absolute
because
pits.
you'd quit your job, so you didn't have like
No,
corporate
yeah,
stability. You
no,
were done your coaching, you had your own business, you're single, divorced, no kids, like
yep,
everything is on you,
yeah,
on your tiny little shoulders.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, other than the circumstances, which are obviously different, what was different about you this time
yeah.
moving through the grieving process with your dad than when you move through it with your mom?
Yeah, great question. Though I think so the differences, I mean, the similarities were coping, because you just have to cope,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it's on you, you just have to cope. However, I was a lot more in tune with my needs. So if I needed to stop, I'd stop and I would ask for help. That was the stark difference. I would also, I was like an open channel, you know, and I mean, around the time, so obviously from 2010 to the point where um my dad passed, I'd already really started meditating back then, um, and doing more mindful practice, doing more yoga. That mind-body connection had come online. And obviously those prior years to me starting the coaching, you do a lot of introspection, going through the coaching program. So a lot of getting to know yourself at a deeper level. And I think the huge thing I was aware of was just giving myself the grace and space to feel my feelings,
Mm-hmm.
to not stuff them down, to not, if anything, if I was to use the pendulum as an analogy here, it went from trying to stick it all down to function and continue to then letting it all out. And I think this is the thing I would say for anybody who's listening, because sometimes having a job or having kids to look after is actually can be a healthy distraction. I didn't have anything. So I went full on into it. So I kind of like immersed myself, like I was in full immersion, shall we say, which in hindsight maybe didn't help me. I think I
Mm-hmm.
probably went too deep. And I think maybe, and again, it's going to be different for everybody, but I think sometimes this healthy functioning, of kids to get up for or people to cook for or that kind of thing kind of keeps you going. It keeps you more on that, but then you then have spaces and points of time where you need to emote.
Yeah.
Um,
What
yeah,
just popped into my head as you were saying that is sort of an analogy to the three personality types that we see in psychology, which are
yeah.
anxious, avoidant, and secure attachment.
Oh,
There might
yes,
be more, but
attachment.
those are the three,
Yes, the main.
attachment types. Sorry, not personality
Yeah,
types, attachment types.
yeah,
Um, and it's what dawned on me is the analogy with like the avoidant
yeah,
attachment type is going to be that other end of the
yeah,
pendulum that you described first, where we're just stuffing it down, ignoring it because we're uncomfortable and we haven't been
yeah,
taught how to deal with emotions. That's like the avoidant end. And then you swing clear to the other end, which is which is the anxious attachment, where we're
yeah.
like, no, I got to do all the things and be like,
We're
every
all up
time
in it.
somebody, yeah, like
Yeah,
anytime somebody or anything comes into my world, I'm going to suck onto it with my little suction cups. And the secure comes in the middle
yeah,
when we can balance both of
yeah,
those and learn to have a healthy relationship with the practices and teachings and not almost use them in unhealthy ways, because we can certainly use the kinds of coaching and meditation and mindfulness and yoga and breathwork principles, we can certainly use those in an unhealthy way.
oh yeah,
and and we want to learn to kind of come to the middle to let that
yeah.
pendulum kind of equalize. So that was really beautiful how you described that.
Yeah, no, it's an integration. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if you get
Yep, I
stuck
love
at
that
either
word.
side, you need to be able to sway, to move, because it's like anything, like too much of one thing. There has to be the balance of the yin and the yang. There has to be the polarizing, you know, anxious and avoidant. Sometimes we need to avoid to function, but sometimes we need to go fully into the feeling. But it is yeah, it's an integration. It
Yeah.
has to be for our own health. And so I do. I feel like I was firmly one way with my mum, generally speaking, and firmly the other way with my dad. It was two extremes, for sure.
Well, one thing that I'm not hearing, and correct me if this isn't true for you, what I don't hear is that the grieving with your dad was easier than with your mom. Am I
It was just
hearing that correct?
different. It was
Exactly. And I want to,
different.
yeah, I want to highlight that because I think there can
Yeah.
be this like expectation of people of, oh, well, if I start doing some coaching or meditating or yoga or breath
Yeah.
work or spiritual
Yeah.
practices, whatever it is, then grief will be easier.
Yeah.
think we
No, I
want
think
to
that's a really good.
disabuse people of that expectation. It's not easier.
Yeah.
It is finding, I don't know the best way to explain this, like, is, as you said, finding space around and within it
Yes.
so that we're not suffering
Yeah.
as much.
Yes.
Coming back to that equation, I think
Yeah.
is how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important thing to raise because I actually think so. When my dad, I knew that my dad was, it was near the end, and again, blessed, I had to call my sister to come over from New Zealand. What was awful is that her flight was delayed. And you never know when, trying to balance it all. She's got kids over there in New Zealand and a husband and work and all of the things. Devastatingly, what happened was when he passed, I mean, thank God I was there, but my sister landed 3 hours after he passed.
Mm.
So I mean, thank God I'd got him to a hospice by then. So for the last week of his life, he was in a beautiful hospice, which they were all angels. Is my experience of hospice. Like all angels, every single last one of the people that work there, angels. Such important work. And that was awful having to go to the airport and have her come through and then just watch her crumple before my very eyes, that she missed him. But we were able to go back and spend time with him, albeit he'd gone, but he was still, his body was still there. The the weeks and months that happened afterwards, and you'll know this, Michelle, and for anybody listening, you go into that shock, yes, that numbness, and then the functioning of, oh, I've got the funeral to arrange and the forms to fill in and the do. And you go into doing. And that kind of feels like at least you've got something just to process and do. And it's a weird time. But what I then realized when my sister went back, obviously I was back on my own. And then I had the job of clearing the house. And what I discovered on the months after that, again, I went into coping. And I
Mm.
know this, but I went back into coping again because I just didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
Um, I powered through. And I said to myself, I know grief. I've done grief, like I've checked that box. I know grief. And it's almost like grief kind of rose up in this like big monstrous black cloud or however you
Mm-hmm.
envisage it. And it just kind of went, no, you don't.
Yeah. I'm
And I think,
envisioning, do you have Stranger Things in England? Have
oh,
you seen
yes,
like that,
yes,
the thing from the underworld, the big black thing coming up?
yeah,
You don't know grief. You,
yeah. You
yeah,
don't know
like that's what,
grief. I'll
yeah,
show you. Yeah, it was
yeah.
totally that. And
What didn't you know about grief that you thought you
that
did?
it is not the same every time. There's something very different when you lose a second parent for me, because suddenly you have no anchor. I felt that my sister and I both said, like, we felt untethered, like this belonging had just been uprooted, just kind of, And I think also what was very clear to me after, so I cleared the house, I moved, I did all of the things, I moved into the place that I'm in now, and then I went into like a secondary phase of my grief, but it was back to shock again. So my frontal lobe again shut down. Just totally just went. Yeah, so we're just going to take away all decision making from you. Okay, we're just going to remove anything like that so you can just completely deal with all of the feeling. And I was incapacitated. It was like I was a zombie. It was, I mean, I had the awareness of like, why is this not working? But then I remembered from before, yeah, I remember this stage. Here we are
Mm-hmm.
again, old
So you
friend.
had some awareness of it, and yet it's still there,
It's
even
still
with
there.
all the work, the coaching, the mindfulness that you did, it
All of
was
the
still
work.
there. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
how have you been? Because this is a year and a half, and there are no time
Mm,
limits, as we know.
mm.
What has your journey of healing through this grief and let's not forget, it's not like we heal in compartments. I
No.
find that grief in a present form re-triggers prior
Oh,
grief,
yes.
right? So it's like we're
Yes.
bringing the whole grief train.
Basically like a grief party. Yeah, it's like the grief
Like
the grief train backs up
instead of
and then it all
instead of
starts
peace
going.
train like Cat Stevens, it's the grief train. Let's
It's
all
a grief
hop on.
train.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
grief
not the
train.
grief train. It's the grief
So
train.
yeah, how have
It,
you
I,
been? How have you been being the conductor of that grief train
yeah,
now?
I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna be very, very transparent. Last summer, I was the lowest I've possibly ever been in my life ever. Like, and I've been low before. And it's funny, I actually reached out to a grief therapist because I kick myself because I think, why didn't I do that before? Like, if anyone's again listening to this, the earlier the better. I mean, do when you think, but the earlier the better. I wished I had have just put my hand up earlier and just gone, stop struggling, stop suffering, go and get help. But again, oh, I know grief, so I'll be able to get through this myself because I can.
Good old Gen
Bullshit.
X fashion, by the way. Like I know
Yeah.
I'll do it by
Oh,
myself.
that's
Like,
right.
yeah,
Hyper independence.
yeah,
Bullshit.
yeah.
Bullshit. And so I had this amazing grief therapist. Luckily, I mean, she was 6 minutes walk away from my house.
Mm.
Michele, I'm going to shout her out. Michele, who's over here. She's brilliant. And thank God for Michele because when I told her my story, I gave her a good, like, so over the last 10 years, this is what's happened. And she actually sat, and I remember this as beautiful therapists do, and she just kind of sat back in a chair and said, Christina, I'm just going to shine a light on the fact that if this had come to me as a case study while I was studying my therapy, there is no surprise that you are where you are. Because this is like an aftermath of several bouts of grief you've had, not all of which, by the sounds of it, you've processed. So they've added one on top of the other, on top of the other, and now they're all having this huge party in here. And that's
Like
why
Club MTV with the grief. Like
Club
everybody is just
MTV.
partying
It
down.
was all up in here. And so
Yep.
I I had to surrender. I had to just give over to my grief and go, white flag. Okay.
Yeah.
Like hands up.
Yep. That
So
word surrender, that lands in me. And that is a tough pill for a lot of Gen Xers
it's taken me
to
a
swallow.
long time. For the longest time, to me, surrender was giving up. It's not giving
Mm-mm.
up, it's
Mm-mm.
giving over to.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
an opening and allowing. And it's really quite hard to wrap your head around and to teach. It's actually quite a somatic, it's like in the body, an emotion more than it is logical. It's just not logical.
Yeah.
It's
You can't think your
illogical.
way and you don't think your way
No,
into surrender.
no, you really
Yeah.
no, you don't. You don't. You feel your way into surrender.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
definitely do. Yeah, 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 yeah.
And what has surrendering done for you?
Great, great question. It's so I have another phrase that I call diving for light. And diving for light for me has been you think it's the end, but it's not. It's darkest before the dawn. There's a reason why that saying exists, because it got pretty dark for me. And the surrender is like a soft blanket on the bottom of your pit of shit. Because when you are in the lowest of the low, and I know we've used the analogy before that, the caterpillar and the butterfly, the caterpillar does actually turn into caterpillar goop. And I've felt caterpillar goop before, but this was like a whole new level of goop that I experienced. It was like a whole different ball game of goop. And surrender for me felt like the universe was kind of just cupping my goop, just kind of bringing me back together again and giving me a sense of, I know you feel like this can't possibly get better, but it will. Trust that it will. And it's very difficult to put that in words because it is a feeling. It's a feeling.
Yeah. And by better, that's not a spiritually bypassing toxic positivity. It's
No.
better in terms of what I hear through your whole journey is, and you said it so eloquently before, being able to kind of let that grief grow around you, or let you grow around the grief, however you said it. Like, that's what better is. It's not better like it never happened and
Oh
that everything
no.
is sunshine
No,
and
you
roses.
you live with it. I think
Yeah.
we've talked about this before, that life doesn't happen to you. It happens for you, through you. And the through you, the one component that you must practice and that you must learn is allowing.
Yep. That's one of the
And
key
that's hard, man.
principles of, yeah, of any meditation, mindfulness, is
Allowing.
allowing.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean you have to agree with or like
Oh no,
what you're allowing. It comes
it's an
back to
opening.
that resistance. Like,
Yeah,
if you're fighting against what is,
yeah,
that you can't change the what is, you can change
yeah,
your relationship to it.
yeah,
And that starts with allowing
yeah,
for it to be there, because then from that space where you're not fighting in resistance, where you're in that survival mode,
yeah,
from that space of allowing, you can actually come into a more regulated mode where your
yeah,
executive function comes online, and you can
exactly.
actually start to open the aperture to see what's in front of you. So you can actually start to
Beautifully
move
put.
forward. Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
softening. It's a softening.
Mhm.
And you know, because I'm the queen of metaphor and because I swim,
I love it.
I often think about when we're in fight or flight, we can be thrashing around in the water. So we're trying to fight the water,
Yeah.
which can be just more stressful and it can just get you more and more agitated. And actually, if you imagine rather than trying to push the water away, if the water was grief, trying to push it away and it just keeps coming, that actually surrender and allowing is being at one with. So you lie back and you float in the grief. That's the best way I can describe it so people can feel it in the body. It's a surrendering, it's a letting grief hold you and stop fighting it because you can't fight it. It's futile.
That's a beautiful, beautiful visual and analogy. That's really powerful. So I want to start wrapping us up here. And I feel like we need to have a part two of this conversation, because there's so much that we haven't covered that I want to cover, plus just having you talk about some of the other amazing things in your life. So I think we're going to need to put a pin in some of this and tell folks we're going to come back for a part two, because now that we've gotten kind of some of the backstory,
Yeah.
maybe a good place to end this, to kind of ramp us up for a part two, is to let people walk away with some practical, some real world wisdom that you can give them if somebody is in the throes of watching a parent who is coming to the end of their life, or
Yeah.
someone who has recently, or even not recently, who just has
Mm,
lost a parent.
mm,
What are some of the biggest wisdom tips or practical practices
mm,
that you can give somebody?
mm. I mean, the first one that comes up for me is just make sure you get rest. I mean, it's an obvious thing, but the five fundamental parts of our energetic fuel are sleep, nutrition, hydration, movement, and social connection. And if any of those are not getting met when you are facing any challenge, be it dealing with an elderly parent or kids or both, let's face it, Gen Xers are sandwich because you have kids and probably elderly parents to deal with as well. And it's difficult, it's really challenging. If I could write the whole world a prescription, it would be to give yourself more compassion and the grace and space to not wish it away, to not push it away, to not go, oh, well, what have I got to complain about? Compare your pain to others. No, you know what, you're feeling what you're feeling. And right now, if it sucks, it just sucks. And it's okay to say that it sucks, you know, rather than, oh, well, let's look on the bright side. No, you know, there's time and place to kind of go, this sucks. I'm not having fun right now. And being able to, and we talk about this with the energy coaching that we do, is that all emotions are energy in motion. In motion. Move, move your body. I think that's the other thing I would say, that if you are weighed down by grief or you don't think you have time, I hear that a lot, and I had that. We underestimate the power of just going for a walk and breathing gently and just looking up at the sky and the trees and the grass. If you do nothing else, like actually most basic things of a good meal, a good, big bit of water, a hug from somebody if you can get it, and a walk out in nature, that keeps us right. And if we are not allowing ourselves those things, we're gonna make it so much harder for ourselves.
That's such a beautiful umbrella of wisdom. And there's so much underneath that we can get into in terms of pulling some of those apart and giving folks some real practices. And that's what I want to invite you back for us to be able to do, because I think there's a deeper level that we can take with all of this. I wish we had all kinds of time to talk about this. So I think this is just a good invitation for us to be able to get together and explore this a little bit more, because
I would love that.
I think just coming back to the wisdom that you just shared here at the end, it brings it back to your 2 acronyms. Like, in order to get more rest, have compassion for yourself, create this space and surrender, you got to be able to pay attention inside now and ask yourself, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Like,
Yes.
just those 2 acronyms alone will
Yes.
go so far in
Yeah.
you being able to create space for yourself and your
Yeah.
grief.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
The simple practices are the most powerful, and we overcomplicate.
We do. And for a number of reasons. A, we're not aware that there are
No.
practices available. B, that we think we should just tough it up, suck it up, move through it by ourselves. And C, we don't reach out for help and support. And that's a big, big theme with Gen
Oh,
Xers.
that's
I don't
huge.
ask for help. I don't ask for support. Well, that maybe has gotten you so far in
Yeah.
life. And
Yeah.
I guarantee you there will come a time when life brings you to your knees and you're going to have to ask somebody to help you up.
True. Very true. Yeah.
So, and it doesn't even you don't have to wait until that. Like, ask somebody to help you come over and just listen. Ask somebody to help you, by going to the movie with you or coming and sitting watching TV. Like, we don't want to wait until we're on our knees, because then it's like we're
No.
trying to run a marathon without ever having trained for one. Like,
Yeah.
start some of these practices now.
No.
Start small so that
Cool.
when shit does hit the fan,
Yeah.
you have a little bit of that muscular tolerance
Yeah.
built up to be able to do that. Yeah.
Great point. Yeah.
I want to ask you 2 quick questions at the end, the same questions I asked about your mom. And with respect to your dad, what do you think you lost when your dad passed? And looking back now over the last year and a half, what do you think that you gained?
Yeah, I think I lost my anchor when Dad went. Lost my anchor. It's funny, one of my aspirational values, when you look at your core values, is freedom.
Mine too.
And I feel like that's taken on so many different meanings, because for a long time I didn't feel free because I had the responsibility of looking after my dad. And now I am free, but it's bittersweet. And so, we can look at something and say, oh yeah, I just want to be free. But there's a part of me that doesn't.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. What did it give me? One thing I'm really proud of, my sister and I spoke at his eulogy. And ironically, neither of us could speak at my mum's funeral. We were just not able. And we sat there. I mean, I've never shaken so much in my entire life, but we were shaking, but we got up. And yeah, I was super proud of us both for doing that. That was badass for us both. But also, one of the things that I think we have a shared love of Maya Angelou, but one of my all-time favorite quotes is that she said, people may forget what you said, people may forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that is a quote that I read out at my dad's funeral for his eulogy, because that was my dad. He was a gentleman, a gentleman. He was a gentleman.
And that's a beautiful place, I think, to leave this. And you are such a tribute to him and to your mom in how you are healing, continuing to heal yourself through this and passing on your wisdom and your experience to others so that they can help heal. So I thank you.
Michele.
Thank you
Yeah.
for that, and for being vulnerable, for sharing your story, because I know other people are going to see themselves in your story, and for being my friend across the pond. I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, I'm
I would
grateful for you,
normally
Michele.
Thank you. I would normally end with a lightning round, but I'm going to not do that this time, just because
Okay.
I'm going to save
Do
it
it
for the
next
next
time.
time, because there's going to be a part 2. And I really
Yeah.
just want to leave it right where you left it, with that beautiful tribute to your dad as a gentleman. So thank you, Christina.
No, thank you, Michele, and thank you for having this conversation. It's actually been very cathartic for me. And that's also why I'm super passionate about sharing my story, because I don't, as we've said throughout this, we don't talk about this stuff enough. And if I can reach one person and just say, look, you're not going crazy. There's nothing wrong with you. This is a human thing you're going through. Yeah, if I hear anyone who's ever lost anyone, I'm just there, and I think you just feel compelled. Well, I do, with the amount of work that I've done with myself and my grief. I hate the thought of anyone feeling alone, because it's a really hard time to feel alone. So thank you
Well,
for.
and on that note too, I don't want to forget, I want folks to know where they can find you. And you also have a couple of offers. You have a free download and a discount code. So can you tell us where folks can find you and about those 2 offers?
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, so I'm on lots of socials, but I'm AuthenticActionCoaching.com is my website. So I'm Authentic Action Coach across YouTube, across Instagram, LinkedIn, all the places. And so yeah, all of the links are going to be there. But yes, so we've not really touched much upon the breath work, but I know we'll do that next time. But I have created just a very simple free PDF download that gives you kind of the 5 main ways that you can improve the way that you breathe. So that's something, again, that's foundational to your health. So that's there as a free download for anyone who wants it. And then the other offer was the Energy Leadership Index assessment that Michele and I both are trained in. A really insightful tool. If you want to hear more about it or know more about it, then there's lots of information on my website. But yes, if you put in the code, I believe it's GenX. Is that the code I said? Yes.
I'll put it in the show notes, but I think that's right.
Then you get 10% basically off the cost price of of actually having that assessment. So if you are interested in exploring your energy levels and wanting to improve the way that you think, feel, and act, and increase your self-awareness, then it is one of the most powerful tools that I've ever come across to do that. So yeah.
I agree. And we're like throwing a whole bunch of new stuff at folks right at the end. And so I think we're going to pick up on some of that stuff in part 2. I think we'll talk about the breath work. We'll talk about the energy work. So we'll remind folks of those offers and the discount code too. So stay tuned, more to be revealed on those really helpful, supportive practices. And I'll put everything in the show notes so that people know where to find you and how to reach out to you. So thank you, my love. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Hey, do you see why we need a part 2 to this conversation? Toward the end, we threw a lot in and we were a little pressed for time given the tech issues at the beginning, which is okay. We got through it. We did our best. And it just was the perfect invitation now for me to invite her back for part 2. So hopefully the wisdom that Christina shared at the end kind of sets you up into wanting to come back for another conversation with us. And in the meantime, I want to invite you to get curious about your unhealed grief, about what you have been ignoring or resisting in your own life in terms of the pain that you've experienced. And please know that you are not alone. I don't care how much of an independent Gen Xer you think you are. Human beings aren't meant to function by ourselves. We're meant to have community and support. That's what I'm here for. It's what Christina, that's all my lovely coaching friends and meditation practitioners and just friends are for. So if you need someone to support you, please let me know, let Christina know. Reach out to a friend, reach out to a therapist, a support line, whatever it might be, because I don't want you to go through this healing journey alone. So until next time, when we have this more practical, pragmatic conversation about how you can navigate the grief and loss of a parent, please know that you aren't alone. And as always, stay gold, Gen Xers.